continue our study through the book of Judges. So if you got your Bibles and you want to open them up to Judges chapter 5, Judges chapter 5, we're going to look at Deborah this morning. Last week we looked at chapter 4 and the fourth judge in the book of Judges, Barak. Now, Barak is the one that serves as judge, but because of Barak's character and because of Barak's choices, he's not the star of the story. He doesn't receive the full glory of being that judge. He's eclipsed, and in many ways he's eclipsed by Jael, but the true star of this story is Deborah. Deborah the prophetess. One of only two women in the entire Hebrew canon, the Old Testament, named specifically as a prophetess, one who stands between God and God's people, one who hears the voice of God and delivers God's voice to his people. Deborah is a prophetess. And so last week in chapter 4, we learned the story of Barak as judge in prose, in narrative. We get the story. But here, and this is unique in the book of Judges and fairly unique in the Old Testament, we get the story repeated, but not as a narrative, not in prose, but as a poem, as a song. And so we get the opportunity to look at this story from another perspective. You know, a narrative, like chapter 4, we could compare it to a real-life photograph. At some level, we're trying to get a picture of the events and what it looked like. Poetry, song, art, this kind of description that we find in chapter 5 is much more like an abstract painting. I kept thinking all week long of, a picture of the night sky and what's that famous painting, The Starry Night, right? Like, they're both detailing the same subject, but from incredibly different perspectives. And so this morning we get a chance to look at this story of God's grace, of God's mercy, God's choice to rescue his people, not because they deserved it, but in fact the opposite, because they didn't deserve it, but God still moved to rescue his people. So let's jump into the text. Verse 1, then sang Deborah. So right away it tells us that we're getting some poetry. We're going to get a song. Then sang Deborah. And for Deborah to be listed first, and for a whole host of other reasons in the text, we'll see we see that this is really Deborah's song. This is Deborah's reflection on what happened. And like Miriam, after the crossing of the Red Sea, led Israel in a song of praise to God. Now, after the victory that God brings about, Deborah, the prophetess, leads God's people in this expression and this exuberance of praise about what God has done. We get this almost tag on, and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day. So once, and this is a theme, and we saw this in chapter 4, like Deborah told him, all right, you're going to be the judge, but you're not going to get the glory. So this is Deborah's song. It's a victory song to Yahweh. It says that the leaders took the lead in Israel, that the people offered themselves willingly. Bless the Lord. So she starts out, and the reason for her expression of praise is that for a rare moment, Israel came together and was actually Israel. They were the people of God. That the leaders took the lead could be translated because of the total commitment of Israel. So he says, because Israel came together, because the leaders stepped up, because they willingly, and that's going to be a key word in this psalm of praise, that they willingly engaged. Bless the Lord. She continues, hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. To Yahweh I will sing. I will make melody to Yahweh, the God of Israel. So it's interesting, this song, this poetic song of praise is dual purpose. She's going to give praise to God, and at the same time, she's going to taunt the kings and the peoples of Canaan. So it's one of those things where depending on who's hearing it, their reaction is going to be completely different. If you're an Israelite and you're going to hear this song, you're going to rejoice and feel joy and gratitude. If you're one of the Canaanites, the enemies of Yahweh and Yahweh's people, it's going to hit you a completely different way. Deborah's personal praise, I will sing. I will make melody to Yahweh, the God of Israel. Let me just say this, by a giant margin, Deborah is the best person in the book of Judges. Nobody even really comes close. She is in the book of Judges kind of the ultimate Israelite. She's the one that, as a prophetess, is in communion and relationship with Yahweh. She is the one that trusts in Yahweh. She is the one that gives Yahweh praise. She is the one that Yahweh is shining his light through. Deborah is awesome. She's awesome. And so we get this opportunity to see this, in a sense, the ideal Israelite in the time of the Judges is this prophetess, Deborah. And now we get a glimpse into her heart as she's reflecting on God's activity and action in the world, and she spontaneously breaks out in praise to him. She says, Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before Yahweh, even Sinai before Yahweh, the God of Israel. So now she starts to describe the scene, the battle that took place, and God's role in it. So she talks about God beginning to move on behalf of Israel. And so she talks about him coming from Seir and moving in the mountains. And so Seir is to the south. So she's depicting God coming from the south, coming in the heavens, shaking the heavens, lightning flashing, waters being poured down, and God coming and arriving to fight on behalf of his people. And all by itself, that's beautiful. But what this actually is a polemic against the Canaanites. I've told you the primary god in the Canaanite pantheon was Baal. Baal was a storm god. Baal dwelled in the north. Baal dwelled in the north on a mountain. Baal dwelled in the north on a mountain and rode the clouds and shot lightning and delivered thunder and rain upon the earth. And so when Deborah starts telling this story, every Canaanite, everyone that lived in that culture would understand what's going on. And of course, there's imagery, there's echoes here of God coming to rescue in Egypt, of God arriving on Sinai. But God comes in Baal-like fashion. And God is the one that gets the victory, not Baal. Right? So even this seemingly innocent little phrase, you came from the south, you came from the mountain, you came in Sinai, you thundered the heavens and the mountains quaked. This is a direct attack on the Canaanites and the Canaanite theology that there is only one God in the heavens. His name is not Baal, it's Yahweh. Right? So this is her praise. And she says, so she begins to describe it a little more. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, we looked at him a couple weeks ago. You got a whole sermon on one verse. Shamgar, the judge. Shamgar, the foreigner. Shamgar, the son of Anath, which It's not talking about who his dad is. It's talking about who he was. It's his role. It's a title. He was a member of, most likely, an Egyptian military troop dedicated to another one of the Canaanite gods, Anath, the goddess of war. God rescued Israel because of their sin by using a foreigner who worshiped another god who came out of Egypt to bring them deliverance. It's no surprising fact that he only gets one verse because it's an embarrassment. So in those days, in the days of Jael, and we saw Jael last week, Jael's another foreigner, a Kenite, one who originally had been connected to Israel, but one whose family had left Israel and made alliances with the Canaanites. Jael is the one who achieves the victory in the story. Jael's the one who drives the stake through the temple of Sisera. Even though Barak was chosen to do it because he didn't trust Yahweh, the glory was taken from him and given to Jael. So we have this in the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, which is she's a prophetess. So even as she's praising God, she's rebuking Israel. I hope you can see that. Like, in the days that we were so far away from God that we brought God's wrath and judgment upon ourselves, who was it that God used? Shamgar and Jael, two foreigners, two people outside of the covenant. This is who God used. She says, in those days, the highways were abandoned and travelers kept to the byways. So in those days, Israel is so weak, the oppression is so strong that the caravans cease to travel. Trade is and you think about the tribes are split and spread throughout the land. So you have a bunch of tribes to the north, a bunch of tribes to the south. We have Sisera is right in the middle of Israel there. And so there's during this time, the north and the south are cut off from each other. Trade isn't happening, at least not by the Israelites. It says the villagers ceased in Israel, they ceased to be. It's a really difficult phrase in Hebrew to translate, but the idea is this, that the Israelites living in their villages were so afraid to go out that they just stayed there. There was no going out, there was no trade, there was no travel. Even at this time, there's probably difficulty even going out and planting your crops and herding your flocks. Like, Israel is under a heavy, cruel oppression. And she says, until I arose. I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. As a mother in Israel. There's something, I love that phrase. Like, this is how she's functioning. She's functioning as a mother. God is using her to appoint Barak to convey God's instructions to the people. I told you last week that Deborah means bee, honeybee, right? And she really functions in this text as like the queen bee. She's the queen mother. She's the one directing and organizing. And we'll see later in this text that she calls herself the mother in Israel on purpose because she's going to contrast herself to another mother later on in the chapter. I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. So, in an ancient city, the gates of the city is where business was done. It's where the elders would gather to make judgments and settle disputes. The gates of the city was in a sense the heart of the community. It's where the leadership would gather. And so what she's describing here is actually Israel coming to her, as we saw in chapter 4, and saying, what shall we do? And God speaking through her as a prophet saying, you know what? Barak is going to come and lead, and Israel needs to rise up. And instead of following the Canaanite gods, which Israel had been doing, now they're going to once again come back to Yahweh. And she says, at that time period, was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel after being oppressed for decades? the military power and might of Israel at that time was a shambles. You couldn't find sword and spear for 40,000. Israel was the weaker party by far. She's setting up the story. She says, my heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. You see that word again? Willingly. Willingly among, my heart goes out. I'm so ecstatic. I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful for those that stepped up and stepped out of their own free choice and volition. Because of that, once again, bless the Lord. Glorify the Lord. Magnify the Lord. Yahweh, I'm going to give you credit for their willingness. Beautiful. Then she says, tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich carpets, you who walk along the way. So Israel is not trading. Israel is hiding in their villages, but there's still caravans going throughout the land. Canaanites, the Midianites, all the other peoples are still trading. And so she's specifically, she starts out, hey, kings, hey, princes, pay attention. Now she's calling out the traders, the wealthy, because a white donkey is a sign of, it's a sign of wealth and prestige. If you're a rich, ancient Near Eastern person, you don't want to ride a gray donkey. That's for the peasants, right? Yeah, I was going there. But see, no, they're going to ride the white donkeys. And they got the lush rugs on them. And all of them, as they're going by, she's like, hey, I want you guys to think about it. I want you to talk about it to the sounds of the musicians at the watering places. I like this. This is the ancient water cooler. It is. I mean, that's how it functioned. I mean, you're in a pretty desolate wilderness landscape, and you got to bring your flocks, you got to bring your herds to the watering holes. And when you come, that's where you're going to encounter other people. And so as they would come and they would divide up their flocks, and that's where the gossip would happen. Hey, did you hear what happened over there? Did you hear? And so Deborah's calling out, hey, I want you guys to be telling this story, that they may repeat the righteous triumphs of Yahweh. She's calling out the Canaanites to give God praise because he has so clearly emerged victorious. She said, the righteous triumph of his villagers in Israel. What a beautiful, beautiful introduction to this song. And now the song begins to turn here. And it begins to turn to now the gathering of the army. And in the previous chapter, in the narrative, we just got this kind of succinct, 10,000 people came, and they came from this and this. And now she's doing poetry, and she's going to elaborate and give us a little bit more information about how the tribes responded in this situation. And some of the tribes do really well, and some of the tribes don't. So she continues, she says, to the sound of the musicians at the watering place, they're the righteous triumphs of the Lord, the righteous triumphs of the villagers in Israel. Then down to the gates march the people of the Lord. So this is the beginning of the battle. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, break out in a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of the Lord marched down for me against the mighty. From Ephraim, their root, they marched down into the valley. Following you, Benjamin, with your kinsmen. From Machir, march down the commanders. From Zebulun, those who bear the lieutenant's staff. The princes of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar, faithful to Barak, into the valley they rushed at his heels. Among the clans of Reuben, there was great searching of heart. Reuben hears what's going on. They hear the call, and they at least contemplate it, but it never moves past that. They hear what's going on. They hear the call of Yahweh. They think about it. But they stay in their villages and fields. Why did you sit still among the sheepfolds to hear the whistlings for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he stay with the ships? Dan was originally given an allotment down to the south along the coast where the sea peoples were. So Dan is down battling with the Philistines, battling with the sea people, and they hear that Yahweh is calling God's people to come together, but they stay with the ships. They stay at the coast. Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, staying by his landlings. Zebulun is a people who risked their lives to the death. Naphtali, too, on the heights of the field. I think this is an important inclusion in this psalm because it once again, it directs us to understand that the victory that is attained here is not because of Israel. It's because of Yahweh. Israel is still broken. Even when God is moving upon them, even when God's prophet is calling, even when God's judge is gathering the army, several of the tribes refuse to come, refuse to participate, and still God in his grace and mercy gives them the victory. This is about Yahweh. She continues on, the kings came and they fought. So it was Achan was the king and Sisera was the commander, but now she says, there's more involved. So this is a battle, and so that they all come together and they fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh. By the waters of Megiddo they got no spoils of silver. The kings come together for this mighty battle. And she once again highlights the location, the general location of the battle. It's going to take place in the Jezreel battle. It's going to take place by the waters of Megiddo, or the Kishon River. I don't know how well you can see this, but you see the Dead Sea there, and Mount Tabor is kind of in the middle. That's where the army gathered, and Megiddo's down towards the south, and Sisera's kingdom is up there to that direction a little bit and up, and so the battle takes place in the middle where you see that river. And that's important. She says, from heaven, the stars fought. And you're like, that's weird. And once again, I want to remind you, when you're studying the scriptures, if it's weird, it's probably important. When you read something, you go, that doesn't really make sense to me. That's where you're supposed to actually dig in, because this is where the cultural context difference comes to play. We think of stars as giant balls of gas and fire. The ancients looked at the stars, at the heavens. They saw the movement of the stars. They saw the brightness and the shining, the flickering of the stars. They saw them as living beings. The ancients equated the stars with the divine host, the angelic creations, the Elohim of the heavens. And so here she is she's saying, this battle was not won by Israel. This battle was not primarily won or even fought in the physical earthly realm. This battle was ultimately decided in the heavens by the forces of Yahweh's mighty host. It was the divine army that fought on behalf of Israel. The stars fought from their courses. They fought against Sisera. How did they do that? It says, the torrent Kishon swept them away, the ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. So Sisera comes out with his 900 chariots of iron, his superior military power. Israel can't even give their army the swords and spears and shields that they need. He's coming out with the iron chariots, and the divine army floods the ground, and the chariots are worthless. In fact, the chariots become a liability. And Sisera is defeated. He says, march on, my soul, with might. I love this. Because of what God is doing, because God is the one that fights on our behalf and fights for us, I can march on. Not because of my strength, but because of his. March on, my soul, with might. Then loud beat the horses' hooves with the galloping of the steeds. There's a phrase here, it's probably, so imagine the plains flooding and the chariots being mired down in the mud and the horses beginning to sink into the mud. And they begin to rear up and paw their hooves, and the clamor, the screams, the terror, the fear. This is what she's beginning to describe as God gives victory to Israel by defeating the enemy. But then we get this other strange little interjection. Curse Meroz, says the angel of Yahweh. Malach Elohim. Curse its inhabitants thoroughly, because they did not come to the help of Yahweh against the mighty. It's a really weird verse for a couple of reasons. So now, one, we got the angel of the Lord, the messenger, the envoy of the Lord, which we've seen over and over and over again in the narrative is God actually manifesting in real time, coming down, making a declaration. This is who spoke to Moses out of the angel, or out of the bush. This is who Joshua knelt down before and acknowledged as the commander of the army of the Lord. And now he comes into this, and it's weird because we don't know where Meroz is. It's apparently a place, a people, a city, a something. But somehow in this mess of things, the angel comes down and says, oh, by the way, you didn't step up. You're going to be cursed. I don't know what to do with that. Besides, take it in, like seriously, that our choices have consequences. Our choices have consequences. We will reap what we sow. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women, most blessed. So now, in a hymn of victory to Yahweh, she is lifting up and elevating Jael, the wild donkey, the foreign assassin who enticed and seduced Sisera into her tent and killed him. And she's lifted up. Blessed of women. Every woman in Israel at that time should have at some sense felt some shame. Who's being lifted up? Who's being elevated? Who's being praised? It's Jael. It's Jael. And it says this, he asked for water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a noble's bowl. So in the last chapter, we got the story. Sisera is running away. He comes to the tents of Jael. Her husband's not there because he was probably back in the battle. He's probably dead already because he'd entered into a contract with Sisera. So Sisera thinks he's going to find safety there, and she invites him into her tent, which is a cultural taboo of the highest order. And it's there that she kills him. And he asks for water, which again, the irony, it just strikes me. Sisera is destroyed by too much water, and now he's dying because he doesn't have any. And she gave him milk. She gives him this yogurt. She brought him curds in a noble's bowl. Oh, that's an interesting little detail we didn't get in the last chapter. In this poetry, she offers it to him in this noble's bowl. She's trying to make him comfortable. She's trying to flatter him. She's trying to honor him. He asks for water. She gives him the good stuff, and she gives it to him in this beautiful bowl. And so it's setting the stage of what's going on here between Jael and Sisera. It's pointing to some intimacy. And it says, she sent her hand to the tent peg and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. It's pretty graphic and poetic language in this song. Like, she went to town. She is a wild donkey after all. Like, she clearly destroys him. And Deborah sings, between her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. Between her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell. Dead. Dead. I don't have time this morning to go into some of this stuff, but there's a lot of sexual innuendo and allusion here. That phrase there, between her feet, literally is between her legs. She covered him in the last chapter. There's this innuendo that actually what she does is a form of seduction. And as she seduces him and brings him in to this place of intimacy where he lets his guard down, that's where she kills him. And that sexual innuendo, that intimacy being thrown into here, that's not accidental, it's not abstract. It's actually significant to the whole story of the book of Judges. Sexuality, female sexuality, the abuse of women, the use of sex as power, it's prominent throughout the book of Judges. In a time when everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes because there's no king in Israel, they're going to default to money, sex, and power. That's what happens. That's what happens. And yet, this Canaanite pagan seductress, this Kenite enemy of Yahweh, is the one that Yahweh uses to destroy the enemy of Israel. If you don't think God is large and in charge, like you're not following the story. Out of the window she peered. Now, verse 28 says like hard left. Now we're going to get a new character added in. Out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera wailed through the lattice. So we have this imagery. Sisera's mother, and he had to come from somewhere. Sisera's mother, back in the city, awaiting report of her son and his army, wondering, waiting, crying. It's this imagery of her peering out a window through the lattice. Interestingly enough, we have all sorts of archaeological etchings and engravings of women peering out windows, waiting for the arrival of their army and husbands and children to come back. So now Deborah, the queen mother of Israel, in her song, she begins to contemplate the queen mother of Sisera. And in fact, I think that's what she was. My guess is that Sisera's mother actually married Jabin, and that's how he got his role as commander. And she's very prominent because we see here that she's asking this question: why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest princesses answer. The Hebrew word there for princesses, it's a ruling term. So she's the queen mother of the Canaanite army. And the queen mother of Israel is singing about her, looking and longing for the return of her son, wondering why he's taking so long from this easy victory he should have achieved over Israel. Her wisest princesses answer, indeed, she answers herself, have they not found and divided the spoil? I know why he's taking so long. They got so much loot. They're taking time to divide it up. And so we start with a little bit of sympathy towards this mother of Sisera. Like the idea of a mother waiting for her son to come back from battle, it should evoke some empathy. But then this next verse really strips that away. She says, have they not found and divided the spoil? A womb or two for every man? Yeah, I hear those, you getting it. You know what she said? She's like, they're getting so much spoil that every man is going to get a womb or two. They're going to get a sex slave. You could translate this Hebrew word as wench. Right? They're going to get a wench or two for themselves. Here's this mother going, when's my son coming back with his sex slaves? See, and all of a sudden we start to remember, why is it that Yahweh is using Israel as judgment against the Canaanites? a womb or two for every man, spoil of dyed materials for Sisera, spoiled of dyed materials, embroidered, 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for the neck as spoil. She's worried about her son coming back, but she's really worried about the stuff that he's going to bring, and she's more concerned. She has more value to fancy linen and embroidered cloth than she does for the lives that would be taken on the battlefield. So Deborah says, so may all your enemies perish, O Yahweh. May all your enemies perish, O Yahweh, but your friends be like the sun as he arises in his might. I love what she's doing here. There's irony in this. And may all who hate you perish, but your friends, and the Hebrew there that's translated as your friends, it literally means those who love you. May all your enemies perish, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. May those who love you rise like the sun as he rises in his might. Now, in the ancient Near East, the sun rising is considered a god, actually considered 3 gods. The sun itself was a god, a chariot, and there's the god that leads it, and then the god that drives it. So the ancient Near East saw the sun as a god and as a chariot. She says, may those who love you rise up like a chariot in the sky. It's not in the context. It's like, sister, you had your 900 chariots of iron, and they're worthless and destroyed. But may those who love you, Yahweh, may those who love you, may they rise up. May they rise up in his might. And the land had rest for 40 years. It's the end of this judge cycle. God does some wacky and crazy and amazing things. In chapter 4 and 5, we get one prose, one poem, telling the same story from different angles, but it ends in the same way. The land had rest for a generation, for 40 years. Your friends be like the sun. May those who love you be like the sun. This is a covenantal term. Those who love Yahweh are those who are in covenant with him. In fact, it's the same word that we find in Exodus chapter 20 in the 10 Commandments, or the 10 words. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4 to 6, it says, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heavens above or on the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. That's not how you worship Yahweh. He says, you don't do that. He says, you shall not bow down to them. You shall not serve them. What have we seen over and over again in the book of Judges? They bowed down and served the other gods, directly violating one of the 10 Commandments. So you shall not bow down or serve them, for I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. What does it look like to hate God? Well, it looks like bowing down and serving other gods. He says, don't do that. And then he says, but he shows steadfast love to thousands of those who love me. That's the same word at the end of chapter 5 of Judges. He shows steadfast love, hesed, loyal love, to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. I mean, that's the story of Judges 4 and 5. It's the story of Judges. This is the story of Israel. God is calling his people to be his people, to love and trust and honor and serve him and him alone. And Israel is time and time again given the choice, given the freedom, given the choice. Who will you serve? Who will you trust? Who will you love? We think about the implications of this text for us. I was like, do you love Jesus? That's a world of difference from saying, do you believe in Jesus? Do you acknowledge Jesus? Do you love him? Because God pours his hesed, his faithful and steadfast love upon those who love him. Is your love for Jesus reflected in your obedience to him? And how do you obey him? How do you serve him? I'm not just talking about the pragmatic functions you do for God. I'm talking about the inner attitude and heart, the motivation of your service to God. Do you serve him begrudgingly? Do you serve him manipulatively? Oh, that's common. Hey, God, I'll do this for you if you'll do this for me. Or do we serve him? Will we choose to serve him? As Deborah brings to the forefront over and over again in the psalm, will we serve him willingly? We choose him intentionally, thoughtfully, and consistently. The thrust of the Song of Deborah is repeated in her praise of the willingness of Israel. I think this is how it points to Jesus. I think in this judge cycle, it's Israel's willingness to trust and follow Yahweh that points us to the ultimate Israel, the true Israel, Jesus, who willingly served and loved and sacrificed. You know, we're drawing next week into Palm Sunday and the week after into Resurrection Sunday, into the celebration, the remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice. And all week long as I'm studying this and thinking about how the willingness of Israel here points towards the willingness of Christ, my mind just kept coming back to the Garden of Gethsemane. There on that night of betrayal, Jesus takes his friends with him into the garden. He says, pray with me. Pray with me. You know, Luke 22 tells us about it. It says, he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and he prayed. He prayed. He pleaded. He asked. That's what prayer is. It's asking. It's what the word means. He's asking. Jesus prays. He asks. He says, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. If there's another plan, if there's another option, let's take it. But maybe some of the most beautiful and important words ever uttered by Jesus. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus, as he's faced with the pain, the shame, the scorn, the brutality of the crucifixion and the cross, and that's just the human element. Because beyond and above that, Jesus on the cross will suffer the wrath of God for the sins of mankind, for the sins of the world. On the cross, all of Satan's power, all of the enemy's power will be unleashed. All of darkness will focus in upon Jesus on the cross. And knowing what awaits him, Jesus willingly went to the cross. Jesus willingly chose to serve the Father, no matter what. This is why Jesus is exalted above every name and power. He shows us what it is supposed to be like. Not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from the heavens, strengthening him. If it's weird, it's important. Being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. The agony of Jesus as he submits himself. The agony of Jesus as he chooses, as he willingly offers himself in service to the Father on our behalf, was so intense that he began to sweat blood. It's an actual medical thing that happens under extreme pressure and intensity. Like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Sometimes we present the life of Jesus, the death of Jesus, in such simplistic and minimalistic terms that we almost make it sound easy. Jesus was born of a virgin, he died and rose again. Well, this is God made flesh. This is Jesus not grasping his divinity, but humbling himself to come as a man and humbling himself to death on a cross by choice. Willingly. We worship and trust and give our allegiance and faith to one who chose to die in our place, to die in our stead. When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. I like that phrase, sleeping for sorrow. They're terrified. They're overwhelmed. The last week for them has been a whirlwind of emotion, and Jesus keeps talking about how he's going to die. And one of their own, Judas, just dipped some bread with Jesus and then got filled with Satan and left. And now here they are with Jesus in the middle of the night in a garden. Jesus is sweating blood. They're freaking out. They're so overwhelmed, they fall asleep, which makes complete sense to me. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." The willingness of Jesus to take our place makes me love Jesus so profoundly, so deeply. It's so beautiful. We celebrate it each week in communion, that Jesus offered his body. Jesus offered his blood. Jesus chose to be faithful when we've chosen to be faithless. Jesus perfectly loved and served the Father, and we get the benefit of his perfect obedience and righteousness. Is that not amazing? I got one last thought before I close here. I was just thinking about, it's so strange, chapter 5, to have this poem, this song, right in the middle of this narrative text. And it doesn't happen often. We saw it in Exodus 19, Miriam and the Song of Moses. We see it a couple other places. We see it in the birth of Jesus, the Magnificat, the spontaneous praise of Mary. Is it interesting? They're all by women. They're all significant there. But why is it there? And this just kept striking me over and over and over again this week. We need not simply truth, but we also need beauty. We need beauty. There's a truth that's revealed in beauty that's not revealed in other ways. I think particularly in Protestantism, particularly among evangelicals, especially in the last couple hundred years, we've been so heavily focused and emphasizing truth. And we have done a terrible job with beauty. You don't believe me? Look at this building and then go look at an old church and tell me which one evokes something in you. Tell me which one moves you towards praise and adoration. Which one moves you to reflection? I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to bring more beauty in here. We've been bringing more beauty out there. I hope you've noticed. Beauty matters. Truth matters. And they're not enemies. See, the gospel is true and beautiful and good. And we need it all. And it kept striking me over and over again this week for myself and I think for all of us. Beauty matters. because it's a reflection of who God is. The beauty of God's creation and the beauty that God's creation creates, it matters. So we got to love God with our minds. I'm not saying we substitute beauty for truth. It's not an either-or situation. It's both and. So let's love God with our mind. Let's elevate and depend on the truth. Let's search the scriptures like the Bereans to see what's true and right and good. And let's love God with our hearts. Let's express that love and joy and passion in the beauty of art, in the glory of creation. I think so many of us struggle in our faith because we've only been nurturing the truth side, and we've been neglecting the beauty side. Our God is not only true, our God is beautiful. And the goodness of God is the combination of those two things. I think this chapter 5, is included to point us and to remind us of the need of beauty, of the need of art, of the need of emotion, of joy and exuberance, and the need that we all have to declare it and to let it out. So let the song of Deborah stir a song in our hearts. Let the praise of Deborah lead us to praise Yahweh, the God who has delivered us once and for all in Jesus our King. Let us worship him in spirit and in truth, and let us revel in his beauty and his glory. Amen.